Hello, everyone. Welcome and welcome back. If you are new, this is the Trees Stare Back podcast. My name is Eric, and you'll notice that I am alone this week. Morgan is still not feeling good. If you've been keeping up with us, you'll know that we're a bit late as far as uploading goes. It's been about 3 weeks since we were supposed to upload. I'm not kidding when I say every time that we went to record over these past 3 weeks, one of us or both of us had fallen deathly sick or just completely unable to record. Morgan came with a bad case of stomach flu. I was having some pretty bad headaches one of those weeks. And right now Morgan is suffering some pretty bad cramps. We don't know if this is just extremely unlucky timing or if this is something that's deliberately trying to keep us from recording. But you are stuck with just me today. But we're going to go ahead and continue and upload anyway. Thank you all for all the support that you've given us and being patient with us. But as always, thank you all so much for joining us. You can follow us on YouTube and on Spotify if you just want to listen to audio. Here at the Trees Stare Back podcast, we do stories that you send in, and we do stories of our own related to all things creepy, haunted, or cryptic. If you have any scary stories that you want sent in and that you want to be read, you can send them to the email listed here and in the description of both Spotify and YouTube. With the stories that you've sent in, we're going to be covering La Llorona this week. So before we get into any of the stories that you all have sent in, we're going to go ahead and do a brief overview of the actual story behind La Llorona. So there are different variants and different stories of La Llorona told all across the world, from the southwest United States all the way to the north of Central America and Southern America, all the way to Spain. These stories are different in their different ways they're told, with what's happened, and with the real encounters that have happened. There are stories that La Llorona caught her husband cheating and took out her kids afterwards in a fit of grief, and there's also stories that La Llorona herself was taken out by her husband, and dozens of stories in between. Now, the stories of La Llorona are said to go back as far as the 1550s, but the earliest publication of any story regarding La Llorona was done in the 19th century, and this was done in the form of a sonnet by Mexican poet Manuel Carpio. Now, in this tale of La Llorona, there is no case that she had taken out her kids. This was a story that La Llorona was a woman named Rosalia who was taken out by her husband. However, the most well-known story comes from a Mexican folklore where La Llorona had caught her husband committing adultery, and in such a fit of anger and grief, she had taken out her kids by drowning them in a nearby river. Once she had realized what she had done, she went into such grief that she herself drowned herself in that river. And that now if you're walking along roads that are close to a river, if you're driving along them, you can see her walking up, pacing the roads near that river, crying and weeping in search for her children. Now, in my opinion, as far as cryptids go, this is definitely one of the most tragic tales. A lot of people consider this parallel in a way to The Woman in White. A lot of people say that they are of the same story, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. They both come from similar stories of a woman who caught her partner cheating, or a woman who went insane from seeing something of that level of velocity and then took out her children by drowning them. The story is told all over, but mostly in the form of people who have actually seen her. Whether or not this was a story that had actually happened or not is completely up for debate, whether La Llorona was a real woman or not. But I believe that there's been enough manifestation to this story that something along those lines has been created. There's been real events and real stories of people who had seen La Llorona or the Woman in White, and we actually have a few of them here. We have 3 stories regarding La Llorona from different individuals, and we're going to go ahead and jump into those now. Before I was born, my dad was an alcoholic, and because of his drinking, he often left my mom alone to raise my older siblings, many times not coming back home from days to weeks. Because of this, my mother had developed an anxiety disorder. He had traveled to America, later taking my mom and older siblings with him when he secured a job and had found a place to live. He cleaned his drinking habit and became sober after my mom discovered that she was pregnant with me and my twin after arriving in the States. Before he died, when I was 13, he often took me and my sister to Mexico every summer because he didn't want us to lose our culture. It was common for kids to be alone in Mexico, to be mostly independent. So at our ranch, there's a lot of land in front and back, but mostly in the back. There's a large field at the back of our house. The lot itself is huge, but the corn and grass that grew there was so tall, whenever I would go into it, it would completely hide me. I would reach a little taller than my dad's in height, He was 6'1", just for perspective. The field started right when you stepped out of the back of our gate of the house. There's a tall step to get in, so with that height you could see over the field easily. Across the field you can see a smaller, almost pinprick view of a blue house that belonged to my grandma. My sister and I were never allowed to cross this field to get to her house without an adult with us. We found this odd because, as I've said before, kids were often left alone in Mexico. My sister and I would travel miles to our cousin's or friend's house and to the stores, and most of our travels were either on horseback or by walking in the dark. We didn't like walking during the day because it was always so hot, so we would wait until the sun went down. So one day I asked my dad why we weren't allowed to go to Grandma on our own. This was late, so the rest of my family was asleep. My mom, being a religious woman, never allowed my dad to talk about things that she thought would attract negative energy. But with her being asleep, my dad took this as an opportunity to warn me. So when my dad wasn't sober, he often found himself drunk and wandering around the streets. This place was mostly land, in the middle of nowhere kind of place. In front of our house, there was a small river that ran along the dirt roads, so whenever he would hear water running, he knew that he was getting closer to home. This one night, however, he wasn't as intoxicated as he usually was, so when he was walking down the dirt road getting closer to my grandma's house and seeing the field, he started to hear running water. This was strange to him. While he could see the shape of our house in the distance, it was still far. It wasn't a distance that would be close enough to hear any water. Confused, he looked around to see if anyone was dumping water or running a hose. Of course, no one was up this late doing anything with water, and especially not his mother, my grandma, as she was already getting old and weak. Not wanting to wake my grandma, he decided to cross the field to get home instead of walking around it. He had also been warned as a kid not to do this, especially in the dark. He had chalked this up to superstitious belief and stepped foot in the field. Immediately, he felt a sense of dread. But being a Mexican man, he was taught to be a man, not show fear, so he moved past his dread and continued into the field. This field was usually noisy. Lots of crickets and grasshoppers were heard at all times of the day, so after a few minutes of walking, he noticed that the bugs had gone completely silent. Now in Mexico, especially in this area, it was never quiet, at all. If it was and you told someone, you weren't believed and you were mocked for being a scaredy cat. So he noticed it was silent, so quiet that he could hear his heart beating in his ears. He stopped moving, confused as to what was going on. He started to look around, and keep in mind that he was barely hitting the halfway mark in the field to our house. He felt the air get knocked out of him when he saw a woman standing just a few feet away from him through the corn and the grass. He couldn't move, terrified of what he was seeing. He described her as having no eyes, but it wasn't just two black holes. He said that he could see her veins, blood in the sockets as if they had been freshly gouged out. Her mouth was hung open, her tongue gray and her teeth nearly blackened. Her hair was wet, plastering her to her skull and her forehead. Her pale skin was so stretched out that he could see her bones through the white dress that she wore. Water was dripping from her, and my dad watched as she swayed back and forth as if in a daze. After the initial shock, he started to hear it, the running water and her quiet weeping. Instincts had kicked in and he looked away from her, telling himself that he was just drunk and he was letting his mother's stories get to his head. But he knew that what he saw was real. He kept walking. He couldn't run even if he wanted to. The field was never taken care of, and if he had ran, he surely would have fallen, and he could hear her crying getting louder and louder. It was following him. When he was nearing the house, he said that her wails started to become shrieking. She had kept saying over and over, "Mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos?" When he made it out of the field, the crickets came back. He could hear the river just across the front yard, but he was terrified and did nothing else but walk into the back of their house and lock it. He told me that's why we were never allowed into the fields without someone present and to not play with dangerous things that you don't understand. My dad told me to never tell my mother about what he had told me, and I've kept that promise ever since. Let's hope your mom doesn't watch the Tree Stare Back podcast. What? That is absolutely terrifying. Like, your dad is a way stronger person than I am, because if I had seen that, I would have just passed out in the field. There's no situation where I'm not just checking out the minute I see that. We've been told a lot of scary stories on here. I can tell you right now, if I saw that, that would have topped everything. I've never heard one where she was like away a good distance from the water or anything about the visuals that you told me. That has got to be nightmare inducing, especially if you're intoxicated. It definitely fits into the La Llorona story with her like asking, where are my kids? But just like it just getting louder and louder. And it's like I already have sensory issues if things are too loud. So like if you're already scared, that's gotta be like just way worse. So that story came to us from Mexico. This next story is coming to us from the southwest of the United States. Hello, this is a story that my grandpa told me when I was little, and it stood with me for my whole life and made me not want to go outside late at night. I promise this is 100% true. When my grandpa's brother-in-law used to live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, he had lived on a farm. He used to have all kinds of animals there: sheep, goats, horses, donkeys. The donkey is very important to this story. So one night, as he was feeding the animals, he heard noises. This was around 9 p.m. at night. As he was feeding, he noticed that one out of the 4 donkeys was missing. He had thought maybe she was out drinking water in the pen. He started to go over the thought that maybe they had let the animals loose during the day, but they had always locked the animals up at night. He saw the 3rd donkey standing in the middle of the field by itself, and it didn't move or make a sound. He trained all of his donkeys to walk to him whenever he would whistle. The donkey just stayed looking at the trees near the ditch bank. So he grabbed his rope and started walking closer and closer, but he got this weird feeling and felt like he was getting sick. But he knew to go grab her from the field. And as he got closer, he realized the donkey was taking a different shape and form, and suddenly it turned to be the La Llorona, the weeping woman. He scratched his face and his back as he tried to run from her. He showed my grandpa and my grandma his back, and to this day he still has scratches, and now he will no longer go outside past 8 to feed the animals. La Llorona is very common to hear in New Mexico throughout the whole state, and I had personal friends and family that say that they had heard her crying outside of their window in the ditch banks. So that's a very interesting take on La Llorona there. I've never heard of her shape-shifting into other creatures to gain attention, but it's like, that's a big thing, is she's trying to get your attention, so, I mean, that doesn't necessarily surprise me that she transformed into a different creature to get attention. Hi. I've never heard one of the stories that came from the United States, but that's a really interesting take. Also, with that being in New Mexico, that does worry me that also it could have been a situation of a skinwalker. I know you're not really supposed to say their names, and I'm also downstairs by myself at night, and the curtains are open. But yeah, that's something that it's giving there a little bit. Not necessarily saying that it wasn't La Llorona, but it's like it's just interesting that because those creatures in that area are very prone to switching forms. So that's definitely something that I would consider if this were to happen to another family member. This next story also comes to us from the United States, outside of the San Francisco, Oakland area of California. All of this happened when I was about 8 years old. At the time, my family and I were living in California just outside of San Francisco, around the Oakland area. It was right after the 4th of July. My family and I had just got done shooting off fireworks on the beach. My mom was packing up the car, and my dad was picking up the grill stuff. My brother and I were tasked with cleaning up the aftermath of the fireworks, when all of a sudden we hear this faint crying sound. It wasn't a baby crying, though. It was the sound of a woman sobbing. We were right near the Oakland Bay Bridge, and there was a bunch of rocks surrounding the base of the bridge. We go to check it out, and as soon as we strayed farther and farther away from our parents, the crying got louder. I could have sworn the rocks were only about 10 feet away from where we were, but it seemed as if we were walking for miles. Finally, we go up to the rocks and didn't hear the crying anymore. We checked it out, and about 12 feet up the shoreline, we see this woman sitting on the sand. She was in a long white dress with really long black hair. She was crying, looking in the water. I suddenly got this gut-wrenching feeling that we needed to get out of there. Our father is Venezuelan, and he always told us stories about the tale of La Llorona, the woman in white. He told us these stories when we were bad, and he'd always say, "Be good, obedient kids, or La Llorona is going to come snatch you away." But I would have never thought this to be true. I tell my brother that we need to leave, but he insisted that we go and see if she's okay. I begged him not to go up to her, but he did anyway. As he was walking towards her, she stood up, turned toward us, and said, "Oh, my sweet child," and started galloping towards us. Ugh! She didn't sound human. My brother realized that whatever it was not good, and ran as fast as he could. We both did. We tried telling our parents, but they just said that we scared ourselves. But I swear to God, later that night as I was falling asleep, I heard someone whisper, "Oh, my sweet child," in my ear. I immediately sat up and looking around, and in the corner of my room, there she was, dripping water onto my floor. She looked up at me and smiled. I immediately got under my covers and started praying that it would go away. Eventually, I think I fell asleep because when I woke up, she was gone. That morning, I looked in that corner and you could see where the water had dried onto the floor, but I haven't seen or heard her since. Every now and then, I get chills down my spine and my hairs stick up. I feel like she's watching me. Even now as I type this story, I feel like I'm being watched, and I'm now 21. Okay. Do I need to hold your brother's hand and tell you not to do that? Why would you do that? Like, I understand. Like, you see someone crying, your instincts are to help. But if you were told about La Llorona, why would you do that? That is textbook definition of what she looks like. I can deal with the fact that you saw her and that she chased you all, but what was she doing in your bedroom? What was that? And then she just pieced out. Like, she only came to scare you again. She just wanted you to know that she's real and that she's out there. Honestly, depending on how long this has been, I wouldn't say that you have really any reason to worry about her coming back, about her to come back and scare you, but I can see why that would be traumatizing, because I would just move. I would just move. There would be no water around my living space for miles. I don't know if you told your parents about that, but I would definitely tell maybe your father. I don't know if maybe he's had any experiences with that, or if he literally just used La Llorona to scare you. But that would definitely be something that I would discuss. And please, if you've had any more experiences with this, if you've seen her at all, and this goes for the other people whose stories we've read, please give us an update. The story of La Llorona is one that has broken my heart since I first read it, and also one that shakes me to my core. And anytime that I'm near a body of water at night, I always am just watching the sides of the roads, just terrified that I'm going to see something like that. If I'm being honest, I'm not incredibly sure what actually happens to you if you interact with her. That is also one of the things that's up for, debate with what happens to you if you've experienced it, going back to the folklore itself. But in the end, interacting with her just isn't good. If you see anything that matches that description, if you think that there is genuinely someone that might be in danger, just call the police. Call 911. If you have a smartphone, they can ping your location. Tell them what you saw. Don't stop and get out for help. Because even if this isn't some sort of folklore creature, you have no idea what people can be capable of. And if it is a folklore creature, that's just all the more reason not to stop. These are just 3 stories that we've been sent regarding La Llorona. If you have experienced anything with La Llorona, or if anyone that you know, and whether it's a family member or a friend, has experienced anything with La Llorona, please send it in to the email that's listed in the description, because we would love to read more stories about this. And if we get enough, we'll do a La Llorona episode 2. Thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of the Tree Stare Back podcast. I promise we're going to try and get back on track with uploading every week. We upload every week Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to try and stick to that schedule from now on. If you have any stories that aren't about La Llorona, anything you want read on the podcast, send it into the email in the description below. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you all in the next podcast.